Scott Hall was one of the coolest guys in wrestling, but he didn't get along with everyone, and he certainly never held back when someone rubbed him up the wrong way. Scott was still finding his footing in the mid-1980s. He was fresh out of training in Florida and bouncing around the territories, trying to learn the ropes. It was still early in his career, and he was trying to avoid any drama that might hurt his chances of getting noticed. At this stage, he didn't drink, didn't party, and was focused on keeping his nose clean. Marty Jannetty, however, did not seem to share that philosophy. He was travelling through the territory at the same time, working alongside DJ Peterson. Both of them were a little more experienced than Scott in the business, and they'd already started to carve out a spot for themselves as reliable tag team wrestlers. They also had a reputation for being reckless on the road, especially when it came to partying. One night, the men decided that it would be funny to trash a hotel room, and the worst part was, they used Scott's name to book the room. They went ahead and turned the room upside down, leaving Scott financially and personally responsible for the damage. Scott was furious and embarrassed by this, but he was determined not to let Jannetty get away with it. He found Marty asleep in the locker room and beat him up.
And I remember asking Bob Brown, who was the booker, Bulldog Bob Brown.
Remember?
And I said, if I slap him around a little bit, am I going to get fired? And he went, no. So, and I'm such a redneck. When I went to the show that night, I knew I was going to fight. I wore old clothes. I wore my old cowboy boots. I wore a shirt that I didn't mind getting blood on. And I went in there and went right to the Bayface locker room and looked around for him and didn't see him. And then turned around and there he was sleeping on a table, and I just started beating his ass.
Wow.
Because all I could think about was them checking in the hotel going, well, whose name should we put? I just put Scott Hall.
Yeah.
And that just kept, all day long, it just kept eating at me. And because I liked Marty. I thought they liked me, and it hurt my feelings, you know.
In 1985, he ended up in the AWA, where promoter Vern Gagne had high hopes of turning him into the next Hulk Hogan. He had the size, the look and the charisma, but he was also still really green, so they paired him with Curt Hennig to help him improve in front of a live crowd. Scott was trying to soak up everything he could, and every match was a learning experience. That's what made Bill Irwin's attitude towards him so frustrating. He was part of the Long Riders tag team alongside his brother Scott Irwin. In the AWA, the Long Riders were dependable veteran wrestlers, and they were often put against younger guys who were on the way up. For someone like Scott, who was just starting to get a push, working with a team like the Long Riders should have been a golden opportunity to learn and get better with two guys who'd been in the business for years. And so Scott and Curt were put into a feud with them. Scott Irwin was more than happy to work with Hall and put him over, but Bill was the one who made his life miserable. He refused to bump and sell for him in the ring, and he just shut him down every chance he got. That meant when Scott threw a punch, Irwin barely reacted. Scott never forgot about this early experience and later said that he should have punched Irwin in the face, but he was too young to know any better.
I think Bill was one of those guys who felt like, who's this jabroni? He hasn't paid his dues, some musclehead getting pushed just because he looks good. So Bill would never shine. I felt he wasn't doing his job. You know, his brother was bigger and better and would do stuff to make me look great, and Bill would bury me. And I was not smart enough to know what to do about it, but I was smart enough at that point to know what was going on. And it was happening to me in big markets in Chicago and, you know, Salt Lake City and stuff like that, where I knew it was wrong, but I didn't know what to do. Now, my instincts would tell me, just punch him in the face.
Yeah.
But I don't want to get that rep as being one of those kind of guys, because then no one wants to do business with you.
When Scott was working in WCW as the Diamond Stud, Ric Flair was the booker, and Scott felt that he treated him like garbage. He said that he treated him like an afterthought and never recognised his talent and charisma, and he never booked him any higher than the lower mid-card. And for Scott, that bad taste never went away. Fast forward a couple of years to 1992, and Flair had jumped ship to the WWF. In a controversial move, he'd brought the NWA World title with him, and he appeared on WWF TV with the belt. Vince was treating Flair like a big deal. At the same time, Scott was just debuting as Razor Ramon, and Vince had big plans for him too. He saw Razor as being a heel world champion himself within a couple of years. In the Federation, Scott was reunited with his old friend Curt Hennig, and privately they questioned whether Vince should trust Flair at all. After all, this was the guy who walked out of WCW with their title and showed up on the competition's TV show. Both men privately agreed that this was a low move on Flair's part, no matter how badly WCW had treated him. During a backstage talent meeting, Vince McMahon told everyone the plan to push Ric. Scott was about to voice his concerns, but Curt gave him a signal to stop before he got himself into trouble.
And then Vince goes, "Is there any questions?" And Curt put his foot on mine and tapped me on the foot like, "Don't say anything." Because I was about to go, "Yeah, I got a question. You sure you can trust this guy?" But Curt gave me the office with his foot, so I didn't say anything. But that's my answer to you. I agree. I thought it was completely unprofessional and very wrong of Ric to take the belt. Now, I don't know the backstory. Maybe they screwed Ric over and he felt the need to do that. I don't know Ric's side of it. I just know as a wrestler, that's the wrong thing to do. Like when me and Kev left Vince to go to WCW, we did jobs on the way out. We did jobs at Madison Square Garden. Nobody ever did jobs on the way out when they were high up. Yeah. You know what I mean? We didn't have to, but it was the right thing to do. We didn't want to screw the fans.
Vince had big plans for Razor Ramon in 1992, including a huge angle with Randy Savage, who was one of Scott's heroes growing up. That was until he worked with him. In interviews later in his life, Scott said that Randy Savage was the most intense person he ever worked with, someone who could even take a compliment the wrong way.
And Randy is the most intense guy I've ever been around. Like, you could go to Randy, like, he had these custom-made boots on, cowboy boots, like handmade, really expensive. I mean, wow, nice boots, Mach. What do you mean by that? And I'm thinking, like, your boots are nice.
Scott claimed that there were early plans for Razor to beat Savage clean and retire him in a major angle, but Randy wasn't interested in losing to someone new. According to Scott, Savage pushed back on the idea and the storyline was scrapped altogether. 2 years later, and Scott had that iconic ladder match against Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania. It's remembered as being one of the greatest matches of all time, but it went a little longer than expected. When Scott and Shawn came backstage after the match, they were confronted by an angry Randy Savage. Savage ran his mouth at them and called them selfish for running over the scheduled match time. The Macho Man might have been beloved by millions of fans, including Scott himself while he was growing up, but as far as Scott was concerned, he'd proven himself to be bitter and difficult to work with. A few years later in WCW, Scott got into a nasty incident with Jerry Saggs. According to Scott himself, the problem started over money. He and Nash had both recently signed with WCW and they got massive contracts for making the jump from the WWF, while guys like the Nasty Boys were taking pay cuts. That was causing tension between the outsiders and the other guys in the locker room in general, and they were also getting a reputation for being cocky, which didn't help matters. During a house show match involving the Nasty Boys, Hall and Nash were told to run in and lay everyone out. Scott came in first, saw Saggs in position and hit him with a chair so hard that it gave him a concussion. Scott later claimed that he didn't realise how hard he'd hit him and it was a mistake, while Saggs assumed that Scott had brained him on purpose. A week later, and the Outsiders faced the Nasty Boys in the ring, and Sags decided to get his revenge. He cornered Scott and started unloading live rounds on him. One of the punches knocked a tooth clean out of his mouth, and it landed in the 5th row. The attack also punctured the inside of his cheek, and his face swelled up. He later said that Sags beat him up so badly that he couldn't even laugh. Backstage, Scott was in shock. He could barely process what had just happened to him. He turned to Nash and told him straight what Sags had just done. Without saying a word, Nash stormed off, grabbed Sting's baseball bat, and went looking for the Nasty Boys.
Because Kev was going to kill him. Kev walked in there and just swung the baseball bat right above his head and said, "You want to find out who's got stroke around here, you mother effers?" So Bischoff called my room that night and he goes, "Hey, God, I heard what happened. Oh my God." He goes, "He's fired. He's fired. I'll fire him instantly." I said, "Man, don't fire him. I've known him 20 years. I said, he's got kids." I said, "I don't want to work with him anymore." But I said, "Don't fire him." I think what happened was he ended up sitting at home for a long time and he got paid. It was just something that happened, It wasn't, I didn't intend for that to happen to him, and he intended to hurt me, which was wrong. I mean, the way I look at it is, if you had a problem with me, you should have fought me in the locker room. Don't hit me with live rounds in the ring when I'm giving you my body. One thing I'm proud of, this dude's hit me with everything he got, and he can't even knock me out. But that's what happened.